you believe that you are salt of the earth. You're the one who's got, the right take on things. So if you say Main Street Vegan, you can get everybody. So we did have this incredible three-way call with this Academy Award winner and my editor and me, and I got my title. And as soon as she had convinced the higher-ups and called me to tell me that the book would be called Main Street Vegan, just all these ideas started just bubbling up. Like there really ought to be a Main Street Vegan radio show. I'm not sure that I had heard the word podcast at that time. And there ought to be a Main Street Vegan production company. And there ought to be Main Street Vegan Academy training vegan lifestyle coaches.
You're listening to the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage. We're here to plant seeds on compassion to animals, your health, and the environment, and topics related to business that align with all three of those areas. Enjoy the show. Well, I have to say today is one of the very special days that I get to interview somebody who was and is one of my heroes in the vegan movement. When I became vegan a little over 7 years ago, this was one person that I followed. I read about her. I listened to podcasts, and I just absorbed what she had to say. Victoria Moran is my guest today, and she's been featured twice on the Oprah Show. So she's no small player. She's actually one of the most influential people in the movement. She's been listed by Veg News among the top 10 living vegetarian authors. She's written 14 books on well-being, including The Love-Powered Diet. I want to know about that. Main Street Vegan and Age Like a Yogi, which is her newest book, and we're going to talk about that. She hosts Main Street Vegan Podcast and directs Main Street Vegan Academy. I've known several people who have graduated from the academy, and they sing her praises on that. She trains and certifies vegan lifestyle coaches in live real-time Zoom classes since 2012. So all of you who started in 2020, I guess it was, and said, oh, this Zoom thing. She was doing it long before that. And she's been vegan since the 80s. She's lost 60 pounds that she maintained with a whole food plant-based diet for the last 40 years, or actually over 4 decades. And kind of makes us feel old here, Victoria, but your new book, I definitely want to talk about that. But before we get into it, welcome to the show.
Why, thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. And I want to remind people, if you like this show and you love the episode, please subscribe to this channel wherever you're listening and leave a rating and review because it helps other people to hear it. But I'm curious, when did you first realize that being vegan was something that you needed to do and that you just moved into that whole lifestyle?
It took me a long time. I took the snail's pace. So I first heard the word vegetarian when I was 5 years old. Utterly fascinating. Thought it was really cool. Had no idea how to do a thing like that. When I was 13, I tried to be vegetarian. I think I lasted 4 months. And then one night, my mom was making pot roast, and that was kind of the end of that for a while. When I was 15, I dropped out of biology class and was so afraid I'd never get into college and all of that, but I didn't want to cut up little critters. And my teacher, when he was signing the paper to get my transfer out of biology, he said, "But you eat meat, don't you?" And I thought, oh, he knows my deepest, darkest secret. And I said, well, I do now, but I won't always. And then a couple of years later, when I was reading books about yoga, there were 3 books in the Kansas City, Missouri Public Library at that time. We're talking the mid-60s. And they all said, if you want to be serious about yoga, if you want to be serious about your spiritual journey, you're going to have to become vegetarian. And so that was really the start of it. And I got rid of land animals first. Hard for me to drop fish because I was in Weight Watchers, which at that time said you had to have fish 5 times a week. It was kind of this idea of magic that if you didn't get enough fish in you, you would just balloon up and gain lots and lots of weight. And that actually happened to me. And it was not fish deficiency. It was because I believed that if I stopped eating the fish, I had to start binge eating again and be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it was tough, but I did make it to vegetarian in 1969. struggling to be vegan. I was kind of vegan at home. Once I heard of it, I didn't hear of veganism until maybe 1970, 71. But I met Jay Dinshaw, the late Jay Dinshaw, and his wife Freya, who founded the American Vegan Society, and they always believed in me. And when people say, "Oh, I'm so discouraged, my brother won't listen, my mother won't listen," well, just keep living your life and just keep accepting them. And chances are something is going to click one of these days. Because for me, I would get so down on myself when I'd fall off the wagon. I'd fall off being vegan. I'd do another eating binge. I'd gain weight. But Jay and Freya just always treated me like a vegan, so that I really had to grow into their concept of me. And that finally happened in 1983. My daughter was an infant, and I really wanted to raise her vegan, but I knew I had to be vegan first. And so that was really when it started for me. I was not at my top weight at that time, but I was probably 40, 50 pounds
Hmm.
overweight. And that just fell off. And I was so surprised because I thought you're going to be eating all these carbs, you're never going to lose another ounce. But it just naturally, my body responded to eating good food. And I think having more peace in my life because I wasn't feeling guilty
Right.
about consuming products that were harming animals. So, yeah, that's my roundabout, convoluted story. And I don't mind sharing it because I know other people have roundabout, convoluted stories sometimes too. And I'll just be in that camp.
Well, and I can imagine 42 years ago in 1983, you said,
Yeah.
and that's actually when I had my last drink was in 1983.
Ah,
And I've
cool.
been sober ever since. And, that was one of the best choices. Giving up smoking was a great choice. And then my other one was being vegan. And it's interesting because the other day I posted on my 7-year anniversary, and I actually had a vegan that reprimanded me and said, "You'll be a real vegan when you don't have to announce how long you've been vegan." And I said, "Well, it's kind of like my sobriety. I share it so other people know it's possible." And I thought, wow, that's kind of an odd statement. But I would imagine back in the 80s compared to now that the stigma attached to the vegan label, was it tougher back then or is it tougher now?
It was pre-stigma, especially when we're talking the 70s when I was initially, trying. People didn't even know what it was. And
Hmm.
what I always say is if you tell your friends that you're going to do some adventure sport, they're probably going to talk you out of it because they have heard that it's dangerous. But back then, people didn't really try to talk you out of being vegan because they didn't know what it was. It was just so out there. And I think now people think they know what it is enough that they can criticize us about protein or about not knowing how to feed children or whatever it
Hmm.
is that we get flack for these days. And yet then it was just sort of like, okay, because it was too weird. It was even too weird to be problematic. But that also meant it was very hard to find food outside your own house. I remember when they put the first salad bar in Kansas City, I cried because I thought it was just for me. And things like, I mean, the cheating that I did do when I was trying to be vegan but didn't quite make it was half and half for the tea and the coffee because there wasn't non-dairy milk. You couldn't
Right.
just walk into some place and say, well, let's see, shall I have almond, oat, coconut? It's like, no, no, it's cow's milk and that's all there is. So it was a very different time. Like tofu, for example, you had to go to an Asian market and dig the tofu out of a big vat of water with very long tongs. And that was after we even heard about tofu. So it was different. One of the pluses about going vegan or attempting to go vegan back then was that there was very little temptation. I used to say being vegan protects you from baked goods because whenever we'd try to bake something, some kind of cake or something, it would usually be about an inch high and weigh 6 pounds. It just wasn't good. And now, of course, people have figured out how to make tempting vegan items that are as good or better than what they're trying to emulate. But in those days, we didn't have that.
Well, and things have dramatically changed, and which is good. And then on the other hand, not so good because a lot of
Yeah.
people now are consuming very unhealthy vegan foods and the processed foods. And I went through that when I first started back in 2018. I initially called myself plant-based. I wouldn't call myself vegan because I thought vegans were crazy. And now I wear a shirt to the gym that says vegan AF, and you figure out what the AF is. But it took me 6 months before I actually said, "Oh my gosh, I am vegan." And I actually cried over it because I realized how much pain and suffering I caused to the animals. But the whole thing with the vegan processed foods. Then I went through a period where I identified as a vegan, not plant-based. So it was like, oh, now I can have all the junk, like vegan corn dogs. That was my thing. I would go through a couple of packs, and I was going into old behavior. So, what do you feel with the combination of being vegan and whole food plant-based? Is that good? Is that not good? What's your take on that?
To me, it's absolutely beautiful. And it's not alien or foreign because when Jay and Freya Dinshaw were tutoring me through this, it was that we do this for ethical reasons. That was my motivation, their motivation. But we have to be healthy because otherwise we'll just get left out of town. And this was a time when people actually were losing children for not having cow's milk in the fridge.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. Well, I've got a whole bunch of questions here, but I want to ask you a few that are going to be surprise questions. And one of them is how you started. Like, when did you start your podcast, Main Street Vegan Podcast? When did you start the Academy? And tell us kind of the history of that, because I've heard nothing but incredible feedback on what people learn from that. They adore you. I mean, it's like you walk on water, according to a lot of people, and because you've changed their life. So when did you first start the podcast and the Academy?
2012 was a really important year for me. That was the publication date for my book, Main Street Vegan, and everything came from that. And I've told before, maybe even on your podcast, so I won't go into detail, but I'll just say that the publisher didn't like Main Street Vegan. They didn't like the idea of Main Street. They thought it sounded too conservative. And it was actually someone who is not at all conservative, and that is filmmaker Michael Moore, who I ran into on the street, and he offered to talk to my editor and help me get that title because he said in America, everybody wants to be Main Street, regardless of your politics, however you see the world. You believe that you are salt of the earth. You're the one who's got, the right take on things. So if you say Main Street Vegan, you can get everybody. So we did have this incredible three-way call with this Academy Award winner and my editor and me, and I got my title. And as soon as she had convinced the higher ups and called me to tell me that the book would be called Main Street Vegan, just all these ideas started just bubbling up. Like there really ought to be a Main Street Vegan radio show. I'm not sure that I had heard the word podcast at that time. And there ought to be a Main Street Vegan production company. And there ought to be Main Street Vegan Academy training vegan lifestyle coaches. Well, all of those things started coming into being very quickly with the podcast, which has been running now nonstop for 13 years. That did begin as an online radio show and podcast after the fact with Unity Online Radio, which was the radio ministry of the Unity churches. Unity is a very liberal kind of Protestant denomination founded by very devout vegetarians. Back in the 1890s, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who founded Unity, were printing their Bibles with faux leather covers. How could you find faux leather in 1895? I don't know, but they did. So the radio station was ready to have the radio network was willing to have a vegan show, and that's really where it got its start. And they're no longer broadcasting, so we're an independent podcast. And originally, I thought, being called Main Street Vegan, that my listeners would all be the veg curious. But
Hmm.
I learned fairly soon that people who listen to vegan podcasts are largely vegan, and that's not bad because we need to keep our people in the fold. Um, and so the way the show is now is it's very much about storytelling and getting into people's actual lives and more casual conversations, because I think we really do need to support one another and shore each other up. So that's the podcast. And then Main Street Vegan Academy started in June of 2012. And I really didn't know if anybody would come. I mean, I'd been vegan a long time, but my writing career had gone in a little bit of a different direction. And I was doing more self-help books. The two Oprah shows, were in that self-help genre. I wrote a book called Creating a Charmed Life that
Hmm.
sold 250,000 copies and did all sorts of amazing things. But when I wrote Main Street Vegan, it was like I knew I had to give something back to the animals, and
Hmm.
that started this other part of my life. So as I say, I didn't know who'd come, but we got 13 people signed up for the first course, and we're about to do our 37th cohort.
Wow.
And people go out in the world and they just do such amazing things after Main Street Vegan. I'm so proud of them. One of our graduates is Leanna Levine Reisner,
Hmm.
who founded Plant Powered Metro New York, which I hear is going to go beyond New York and change the health of people all over everywhere. And we've got B&Bs and a cowboy boot company and restaurants and food trucks and people working for plant-based companies and for animal rights charities, and doing podcasts and lectures and books from real publishers. I mean, it's really quite stunning. And then the production company, which is the other part of the kind of Main Street Vegan trifecta, we were the lead producing entity for Thomas Jackson's A Prayer for Compassion in 2019, a beautiful documentary about spirituality and food choices. And we're now working on a feature film, which, had I known before we started that was sort of like climbing Mount Everest blinded in a blizzard, but we're doing it anyway. And our feature film is Miss Liberty, about a cow who escapes from a slaughterhouse. We are in development on that. And I think kind of the moral of the Main Street Vegan story is you just keep going. You keep
Hmm.
going, whether
Hmm.
it's you're the vegan or whether everybody is saying, oh my gosh, you're vegan, you should have died last year. You just keep going, and the world gets a little bit better, and then it kind of might slide back, but we're moving it forward. And I can't imagine being alive for any reason other than that.
I love the way that you shared all that because it's so true. The longer that I'm vegan and the more vegans I surround myself with who have a mission, not just I don't eat meat. It's like we truly, truly have a mission. It's like it gives life a whole different purpose, and I just think that's phenomenal. Now, before we go any further, I want people to know how they can find you. What's the best web address, and how do they find out more about the Academy?
Sure. MainStreetVegan.com is the website for Main Street Vegan Academy. And I encourage people to read the homepage and the page called the program so that you can get into a little more depth and detail. And as I say, our fall program for 2025 is about to begin. But if you're listening to this a little bit later, you can be in touch anyway. And if you're interested, we can probably get you in for this cohort. Then I also have an author website, victoriamoran.com. For a long time, Main Street Vegan was my only website. But then when I was wanting to write my current book, Age Like a Yogi, my agent said, you've got to have a website that doesn't say vegan, which is really too bad. And yet I understand that people are afraid of something new or afraid of something that maybe they have a little admiration for, but they don't really want to do it.
Hmm.
And the truth is, we all have many aspects to our lives. So at victoriamoran.com, you can read about all my books and kind of how I see life. And there's even a photo gallery. So those are the two websites. And pretty much online, Victoria Moran author is the way you can find me most
Excellent.
places.
And we'll put all that in the show notes. But now
Thank
your
you.
newest book is Age Like a Yogi, and
Yeah.
it's about a heavenly path to dazzling the third act. Okay, I love that because I'm in my third act. And let's define first of all, what is the third act? So where does that eh, what age does it begin?
You know, we always think about aging as post 50. In this culture, it's just, you get to 50 and then it's sort of like, okay, now you're on the other side. And I can understand that for women and menopause happening right around that time, why that division is made. But in Ayurveda, which is yoga's sister science, they say youth ends at 60. And I love that idea. They don't say, oh, you kind of start getting old at 60. No, they say that's when youth ends. And what that means is that for those first 60 years, it's kind of like a retirement account. We're putting assets into a health account during those 6 decades of youth. If we know what we're doing and if we're blessed to know we're supposed to be putting assets into that account. And then from 60 on, those investments, those deposits are to keep us going and help us stay steady. And then we're drawing from what we deposited earlier as well. So, third act is kind of maybe retirement and on, but certainly anybody can enjoy Age Like a Yogi as long as you know that you're no longer a kid. I mean, if you're
Right.
45, you can probably get a lot of out of Age Like a Yogi.
Well, it's interesting because I'm doing this program right now where it requires 2 workouts a day, and I did my first workout riding a bicycle at 7 o'clock this morning. Then I went to the gym, and I was thinking, it's not like when I was in my 30s, and yet I'm crushing it. In my 70s, I'm crushing it, and it's to do with the way that I eat, my mindset, the whole spiritual thing. Because when I was in Salt Lake City, I used to go to Unity in Salt Lake City, and we have Unity here and International Spiritual Center, and I'm outside of Eugene, Oregon. But want to know with growing older, have you found that, because I know you're very involved in yoga, have you found that that helps with aging?
Oh, very much. But I think we need to define yoga
Okay.
because well, now, and again, when I got involved in yoga back in the 60s, people just knew it was foreign and weird. And they thought maybe it was a fermented milk product. They weren't sure. It was just foreign and weird and you should stay away from it. But what we have now is this idea that yoga is doing acrobatic feats and
Hmm.
posting them on Instagram. So hatha yoga or the physical side of yoga is one of the 8 limbs of yoga or the 8 limbs of Raja Yoga in the beautiful ancient text, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And it's an eighth. And if you think about going to school and you're going to be given 8 subjects, I mean, you don't think, oh, she goes to a school and all they do is math all day. No,
Hmm.
that's one of 8. And so asana, which most people think of as yoga, is a wonderful thing for growing older because it can grow with you. And now we have so many different kinds of yoga. Some are very, very athletic, and that's great for when you're younger. Probably when we get to be older, when we get to be in our 60s and our 70s, we're better off getting our major strength training and our aerobic workouts in more of the kind of walking and weightlifting
Hmm.
way,
Hmm.
because some of the yoga stuff it's very acrobatic in the advanced
Right.
phases, and yet it's also so slow and so adaptive that you can do it your whole life. So my first yoga teacher, I moved to London on my 18th birthday, wandered into a little spiritual bookstore in London on Cecil Court. If anybody's going to London, Cecil Court's right there behind Trafalgar Square, and it's Watkins Books. And Watkins Books, I just walked in and I knew, oh, this is my Oxford. This is my Harvard. This is where I'm going to learn about life. And also there was a sign on the wall that someone was teaching yoga. And so I started taking hatha yoga asana classes with Stella. She's now 100 years old. She teaches she teaches chair yoga twice a week, and she walks upstairs to her third floor flat where she lives and where she hosts a women's salon every Sunday. So these are the kinds of role models that you can find in someone who truly dedicates their life to yoga, which is not just a practice of exercise, but it's also breathing. It's also meditation. It's also an involvement in moral precepts and personal disciplines. And one of those moral precepts, in fact, the first one is ahimsa, or nonviolence, harmlessness, reverence for life. And that's also at the center of a vegan worldview. So yoga fits in quite perfectly.
I'm so glad you're explaining this because I didn't realize that about yoga. I do my morning yoga practice I've got Adrienne on YouTube and I've got Jen Hillman. Those are my two favorites. And I really thought it was just the movement. I didn't realize there were so many parts to it. And I'm curious if with people who practice yoga today, with a lot of people, how many do you think really understand the whole ahimsa side of things?
Very few, because just as you say, it doesn't come up in most settings. Sometimes it does. Jiva Mukti Yoga, for example, founded by David Life and Sharon Gannon, who wrote the foreword to Age Like a Yogi. They're vegan, they're very spiritual, it's all in there. Integral yoga, which is a system that I've done for many years, really integrates all of the phases of yoga. They've always been very dedicated to vegetarian lifestyle, and a yogic vegetarian lifestyle is no meat, no fish, no eggs. They have allowed dairy traditionally, but Swami Satchidananda, who founded Integral Yoga in his later years, was saying, you don't really need dairy and you're better off without it. You're better off leaving the cows alone. So there are certainly some systems out there that do bring you the whole deal, but it's the minority compared to the kind of yoga that most people would find at a gym or a health club or something like that. So it's kind of up to us these days to find, well, the yamas are the moral precepts and the niyamas are the personal disciplines. And in the traditional teaching of yoga in India hundreds of years ago, you had to show mastery of those yamas and niyamas before you could get in your first downward dog. I mean, if you were not living ethically, if you were not proving that you're someone who doesn't lie, who doesn't steal, and I'm not talking just not robbing banks, but who doesn't steal somebody else's thunder, doesn't take a pen from a bank without taking it back. I mean, really serious moral foundation for these other aspects of yoga, because Patanjali's yoga, these 8 limbs, they're a ladder. And so the moral precepts are first, and then the personal disciplines, and those are things like cleanliness. And then you keep on moving up and you get to concentration, meditation, and ultimately connection with the divine. That's what yoga means, union.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though you can just do the asana part, or maybe you do the asana and the pranayama, the breathing, because that can be so good for things like COPD and for anxiety. So, you certainly can pick and choose. You don't have to take the whole package. But if you do take the whole package, it can change your life.
Well, in your new book, Age Like a Yogi, you talk about philosophy and Ayurveda. Explain what Ayurveda is, and hopefully I pronounced it correctly.
You
But
did.
I've thank you.
Yeah, a lot of people say, "Are you Veda?" That's not it. It's Ayurveda. So I always think of Ayurveda, and then you'll
What
always
does it
pronounce it
even
right.
mean? What does it mean?
It-
And then explain how you've combined that with philosophy.
sure. So Ayurveda is the science of life. Ayur is life, and Veda, science of or knowledge of. It is yoga's sister science. These great sages called rishis were formulating both of these disciplines about the same time, which was around 5,000 years ago, and then more recently as well. And in yoga, they were looking for a way to find enlightenment. In Ayurveda, they were looking for a way to find physical health, to live this life in the best health possible. And it's a little confusing to people who think, well, wait a minute, isn't yoga about health? Well, there's definitely crossover, but yoga is really about your soul, and Ayurveda is really about physical health. So in Ayurveda, the idea is that when we are in harmony with nature, we're going to be healthy. And there are a couple of ways to do that. One is with coming to recognize the cycles of the day and honoring those. So, for
Mhm.
example, going to bed by 10 o'clock if possible, 10:30 is pushing it, but no later than that, and getting up around 6. And that's not just to be disciplined or show up like you've joined the Marine Corps, but because the energies of nature are such that if you get up by 6, 6:15, there's going to be a little bit of that push from behind to help you get out there, get your sunlight first thing in the morning, do
Mhm.
your stretches, do your hydration, do all the things that those of us who are in this health world like to do anyway, maybe not necessarily at quite the right time. And if we sleep in much after that, then there's going to be a heavier energy. Doesn't mean we can't still get up and do the things, but it's just not going to be as propelled by nature. Something else that's very important in Ayurveda is digestive fire, or Agni in Sanskrit. And our digestive fire is like a little pilot light, and it needs to be stoked. So we need to eat something 3 times a day. Don't need to eat a whole lot in the morning. If we're hungry, fine to eat a lot in the morning. It's just not required. Midday is when we really want to have the biggest meal. And I know that's hard for people working in offices and
Mhm.
whatnot, but if you possibly can, or do it when you can, so many changes happen with your digestion and your energy. And then the evening meal is ideally like supper. Remember, like some of our grandparents and great grandparents, on the farm, it was breakfast and then dinner and then supper in the
Mhm.
evening. And that's really the Ayurvedic view as well. And we want to have this final meal of the day a couple of hours at least before going to bed so that all the food can be digested. And at night, we can do the assimilation and the detox and not wake up in the morning with this backlog of undigested food. So, Ayurveda would say, in its more spiritual iteration, that the cause of disease is that we have forgotten who we are. We have forgotten that we are an incarnation of the divine. But in a more practical and earthly way of talking about the main cause of disease,
Mhm.
they would say it's poor digestion, it's
Wow.
undigested food, it's this toxicity, this ama that we don't get rid of, and then we keep building it up day after day until it becomes more than a nuisance and actually becomes a disease with a
Right.
name in Western medicine.
And in today's world, there's so many people that are blind to that fact. It's like, because when you're consuming meat, especially anything that's on a feedlot, factory farmed, you're consuming death, anger, fear, anxiety, just everything. And people are not connecting the dots on that, and we're getting more and more disease. That I just love the fact that in your book there's a solution. And I'm going to ask you a question about your book, and it's kind of like asking you, who's your favorite child? Who do you love more? What's your favorite part of the book?
I'll just tell you the one that I get asked about the most and that it has been reprinted the most. It's a chapter called Ojas. And Ojas is an Ayurvedic principle that there is this substance, and I want to be careful about my words because we're talking about something etheric, but they talk about it as a golden fluid. Now, it's not a golden fluid that a phlebotomist could take out of your arm, because we're talking in yoga and Ayurveda as well. We've got the physical body, but you also have the etheric body and these other parts of ourselves, other subtler, more spiritual parts of ourselves. But when somebody is newly in love, when somebody has just come back from a great vacation, they're just sparkling to beat the band. Well, in Ayurveda, we would say, oh, wow, you really got your ojas refreshed. So, what we do is, number one, we want to nourish all of our tissues. And in Ayurveda, they talk about nourishing the the blood and the reproductive fluids and the muscles and the bones and the fat, that all these systems need to be nourished with food that is compatible with the individual's body. And we can talk about that in a minute. And also food that is needed by those particular organs or systems. So, for example, we know that if you're trying to build bone, you want to have food with calcium, magnesium. You want to be sure you're getting vitamin D. This is all very much Western medicine.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
in Ayurveda, the idea is that if you nourish all of these tissues, and you do this by really strategically looking at your diet and your life, because we nourish ourselves in ways other than food, then you'll start to build a surplus of vitality. You'll start to build this ojas. And that means you've got the glow of good health. Chances are you look a little bit younger than your age on your driver's license. And people will ask you things like, what are you putting on your skin? And maybe nothing, or nothing that you weren't putting on it last month, but you're just
Mm-hmm.
starting to have this glow. So, some of the foods that are particularly conducive to building ojas, according to Ayurveda, are citrus fruits, dates, sweet potatoes, barley, blanched almonds, and all of these, but then all of our wonderful plant-based foods really help with that. So I'd say that might be my favorite chapter. But I'll
Okay.
also tell you, if I may, my favorite concept.
Okay.
And because the book is really about yoga for our spirit and for understanding that even when we leave this world, we're still here. So that's the yoga part. We're still around. We're still us. But in terms of Ayurveda and in terms of physical health, Ayurveda has a revolutionary secret for aging better, aging slower. And that is, we have these three doshas in Ayurveda, and everybody is a combination of the three. You can do a quiz, a dosha quiz. There's a good one on the website, banyanbotanicals.com. It's an Ayurvedic store. I'm not an affiliate. I don't get anything for your going there, but it's a good quiz if you want to know what your dosha is. But regardless of what your own doshic makeup is, everybody is more influenced by one of them called kapha in childhood and by the one called pitta in early and mid adulthood. And everybody kind of post menopause, certainly post 60, is more influenced by vata dosha. And vata dosha is the elements of air and ether. So some of the things that you start noticing when you get older are things get a little bit drier. So your skin may be drier, your hair, your nails, your eyes. Well, these are signs of vata. You might also find that you're feeling colder. I used to always wonder, why do all the retired people go to Florida and Arizona? And then
Mm-hmm.
I got to that age and it's like, well, it's because they're cold and so am I. And anxiety, a little bit more fear. And we know this from the statistics that there's a lot of anxiety in the older population. And we think, oh, well, it's because they're worried about death and they're worried about finances and whatnot. A lot, what Ayurveda would say is no, they're going to worry about anything because they've got out of balance vata. So what we do to get vata in balance is keep warm and eat oatmeal and hot soup and drink hot spiced almond milk, even at bedtime. Ayurveda is not fond of eating between meals, but there are a few exceptions. And the warm almond milk at bedtime with cinnamon, nutmeg, a little bit of clove, cardamom. If you just think about what these things do, you just kind of go, ooh. And
Mhm.
when you're in this phase of life where it's very flighty, think about air and ether. They're very light. They're not going to be confined easily. But something like a nice, lovely TV show that warms your heart, wrapped in your favorite blanket and sipping that hot spiced almond milk. This is a prescription for pacifying vata, and it's also a way to age in slow motion. And that's really why I wrote Age Like a Yogi.
I love it. I love it. And now people can get the book on Amazon. I know that for a fact. And is there elsewhere that they can get the book if
Oh,
because some
you
people
can,
don't shop on Amazon?
sure, no, you can get it anywhere books are sold. And if
Okay.
your local bookstore doesn't have it, they can order it. And there's also something special I'd like to offer your listeners.
Yes.
Even though I talk a lot about food in the book, there are only a couple of recipes in the book because my editor said he didn't want it to be a recipe book. But I had gathered all these amazing recipes from these wonderful experts in whole food, plant-based living and also Ayurvedic cuisine and health. So if you would like the little e-guide that will go along with the Age Like a Yogi book, you can get that by subscribing to the Main Street Vegan blog and newsletter. So just go to mainstreetvegan.com, scroll down, and sign up, and you'll get yourself that copy of recipes to help you age like a yogi.
Excellent. And definitely sign up. There was a great article that you had by Cheryl Moss in the most current issue
Yeah.
about animal sanctuaries and her whole and she went through your academy and she just sang your praises. So, taking a step back to the academy, what could somebody expect going through the academy? Because it's if I'm not mistaken, you're doing it by Zoom right now.
We do it by Zoom now.
Okay.
Yeah, we were in person once upon a time, but then there was a pandemic. So we are now on Zoom and we will be, I don't know when you're airing this episode.
Soon.
And
It'll be in by October.
okay, so we started September 27th and 28th. That was our first weekend. Everything is recorded, so if somebody's interested, they can still get in.
Excellent.
So what happens at Main Street Vegan Academy is something that I really don't know is happening anywhere else in the world. And that is where we are creating experts in everything beneath the vegan umbrella. So we have animal rights, we have environmentalism, we have whole food plant-based nutrition, and we have communication principles, business principles, how to do a cooking demo, how to get this message out in difficult times. We have a splendid faculty that comes back year after year after year. People like Chef Fran Costigan, who wrote Vegan Chocolate, Dr. Milton Mills, a dietitian Marty Davy, vegan bizwiz Stephanie Red Cross West, Chef AJ and her wonderful husband Charles Marshall, who's a videographer, do a class, You Ought to Be in Pictures, How to Be a Video Superstar. And then sometimes we get other people just to come and do a guest presentation. So a couple of years ago, there's a wonderful man that I think everybody should know about. He is Rabbi David Rosen, and he was going to speak for the Academy, and then the October 7th attacks happened,
Hmm.
and that's the
Hmm.
part of the world he's in. So I wrote to him and said, I'm so sorry, and I know you won't be able to speak, and that's perfectly all right. And he wrote back and said, no, at this time more than ever, it's important that I speak because he is a peacemaker and
Hmm.
a vegan. So, and you can find that on my YouTube channel now, Victoria Moran NYC is what we're calling it now. It might be changed. But anyway, so that was just a special, special gift. And for this particular term, some of our special gift people include Dr. Michael Greger, who's going to be
Mm-hmm.
talking about the ultra processed foods and what does that mean? And what does it mean for something like a Beyond Burger or an Impossible Burger that might keep somebody from having a meat meal? Do we need to say, oh no, those are bad? And I think you'll be very surprised at what Dr. Greger has to say about that. So, not to leave you with a spoiler alert, they're not bad. They're
Right,
processed. There are a
right.
few processed foods that are actually better than the thing that they're standing in for. We're also going to have Wayne Shung, who founded Direct Action Everywhere. He's moved on from that. He served time in prison for rescuing chickens. He's an animal
Mm,
rights attorney, and I happen to think a living saint. So, for all of our 55 hours of programming, you're getting this kind of person
right,
teaching, and you get to communicate, and you get to ask your questions in a way that I don't think it's happening anywhere.
right.
And to me, it's so important that we come together because we don't need a vegan movement and a plant-based movement and all these little kind of fringy
Silos.
groups
Yeah,
because we're
yeah.
tiny anyway.
Right,
And
right.
so with Main Street Vegan Academy, it all comes together. And that way you can speak to any ethical vegan, you can speak to any whole food plant-based person, and you can speak to any omnivore who has never given this a moment's thought with the knowledge and the techniques for communicating in a way that is respectful and clear and
Hmm.
actually works.
Well, you had mentioned the rabbi who's a peacemaker, and I think more than ever now we need peacemakers. And I
Mhm.
think one of the quickest routes to being a peacemaker is to be vegan. And whether you call yourself plant-based or vegan, but not consuming death and anger and anxiety. It's just, it's real simple. And there's so much going on in the world that we're completely upside down right now. And I think for me, the thing that helps me to keep my sanity, because I can get caught up into it. One thing I've been really checking is not, for me, not being on social media so much just to do some doom scrolling. It doesn't work for me because I get really triggered by that. And to also to really be in a retrospective point of view and mindset so that I can realize that I can be the change that I want to see. So, Victoria, this has been so incredible, and I love your wisdom and knowledge, and the fact that you've been one of the longest term vegans around, and you were one of the you were voted by PETA the sexiest woman, vegan woman, and it's like I want that. It's like so. In closing, what are your final thoughts for people, and is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't asked?
Oh, no, it's just fun to talk with you, Kathleen. So we could
Thank
talk
you.
about anything. I guess for me, it's about ease. And I've been going through a lot of stress in my personal life, and it's so easy to just get wrapped up in that. And of course, I am in that Vata time of life, which
Hmm.
invites anxiety. And I can't be helpful when I'm anxious. I
Hmm.
can't help animals. I can't help people. And so I think that something that's really important, particularly right now, when if you look out in the world, whether it's social media or TV news or whatever, everything is it's not just difficult, it's inexplicable. And so we start kind of going at it mentally, doesn't help anything. So when the time comes to kind of shut that off and just be at peace. And a lot of vegans will say, I can't be at peace. The animals are suffering. They are. And if you're being anxious, help to them, be anxious. But it doesn't. What
Hmm.
helps them is our having a steady keel so that we can do whatever we do, whether we're cooking something for somebody, whether we're doing a live on Facebook, whether we're going into a coffee place and they say, what kind of milk? And I say, anything that doesn't come from a cow. It's these little bitty tiny ripples that really will change the world. And personally, I've kind of changed my attitude on this from, I have to do everything to make a vegan world in the time I have left. That's anxiety producing.
Mm-hmm.
So, what it
Mm-hmm.
is now is I want to shine my light as a vegan. And I'll just finish if I can tell a little tiny story.
Absolutely.
Several
Absolutely.
years ago, my kitty had just died, and I was sad, and I was in the subway station waiting for the train, and I was crying. And this woman came and sat down by me, and she said, "What is it?" And I, "My cat died. I'm so sad. My last animal." We hadn't started on dogs yet. Uh, and she was so kind. And then I got on the train and I looked out the window, and there she was with two of her friends passing out the Jehovah's Witnesses magazines. Now, a lot of people don't care for Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm no expert on that subject. I don't know anything about the organization. All I know is that she was so kind to me that whenever anybody mentions that organization, I say, all I know is the only Jehovah Witness I ever met was an angel on earth. And
Nice.
that's what I want people to say about vegans. Like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be one, but that one I knew, gosh, they were nice.
I love that. I love that is such a great story and a great way to end this conversation. And I've been talking with Victoria Moran, who is with Main Street Vegan, and you can check her out at mainstreetvegan.com, victoriamoran.com, and victoriamorannyc.com. Get her book.
Yep.
Did I get that one right?
No, that's of
For the
YouTube.
book? Oh, okay. YouTube. Okay. Okay.
Which is why
Well,
I
just
really
look
need to
up
change it. It's too
if you
much
Google
stuff.
Victoria Moran, you're going to find
Yeah.
her everywhere. So, Victoria, this has been delightful. And to
Aw.
those of you who have been listening and watching, you've been watching the Plant Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage. And I just want to encourage you, go out and do what you know you're here to do, and do it with peace and with ahimsa. Have a great day. You've been listening to the Plant Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage, inviting you to subscribe to this channel wherever you're listening or watching the show. And please let your friends know about the Plant Based Eating for Health podcast show. Live healthy.